this is what we are here for. And quite rightly, we would like to know more about intermittent fasting. As you've said, you've all, some of you have tried it and it doesn't work. And my job here is to try and make it simple. By way of background, I'm a consultant physician at Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital in London. Um, I also head the medical faculty for teaching at King's College, which is the university in London also. In addition, I have a few other roles, but suffice it to say, from a clinical standpoint, that's what I do. Before we go any further, I must also disclose and be honest with you people to say that these are my personal views and of course, scientific opinion, but by no way am I trying to give you personalized advice. As a doctor, I could only do that once I had a one-to-one discussion with you. So unless we do that, it's difficult to use the information I'm saying in a personalized way. We all know every human body is different, every patient's condition is different, and how one responds to that medical intervention or treatment is different. So it's very inappropriate for me to say that there is a single rule that all of us can follow, but there are some general principles that we can follow that can be very, very helpful in these situations. Right. So also to say a full disclosure that uh, that I'm a consultant physician. I obviously do this in my day-to-day clinical practice. Sorry, somebody just said the voice is low. I hope it's better now. I'll just move slightly closer, and hopefully being closer to the camera improves the sound. Yes, so I'm saying this is my clinical practice. I do this for a living, but today is again not that. We are here to share knowledge and educate ourselves, and that is all that I can do today. Right. What do I plan to do? This is the plan. Firstly, I'll explain the science behind fasting, some of the conditions in which there is good evidence that it works, metabolic benefits like weight management, diabetes, improving our lipid profile, blood pressure, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and so on. What are the other benefits? I'll touch upon those. That some other methods of sort of weight loss or diabetes control may not give you, like a ketogenic diet and so on. And so how it might help somebody who is in a high functioning job, how they can use this to enhance their sort of brain power, how to hack your brain, how to hack your body, how to become younger for a longer period of time. And then, of course, any form of fasting brings the challenge of hunger, and how do we manage that? So I'll touch upon that. And then talk about the physical application of this philosophy, this way of thinking, this new evidence, and then also to touch upon what can go wrong, how to prevent that, so that you don't fall into that category where you think, I've tried this doesn't work, you give up, and then blame yourself for your mistakes, whereas actually it might have been something more scientific. Just 2 minutes for my own story, how I started on this journey. I've been in the UK since 2006. Before that, I'm an AFMC graduate, served in the Indian Armed Forces, very proud for that, for 18 years, which included obviously remote areas, including Jammu and Kashmir during Kargil time. Also had the good luck to serve as the faculty in AFMC and in our other big hospitals like in New Delhi and so on. Reasonably fit and well while I was in service. In 2006, I moved across to the UK. And at that point, obviously things started changing by way of physical health possibly. And then 2010 was a landmark year for me. Looking back at that time in India, there was this cyclone hitting, as it does almost every year these days, Layla. And just like what happened with the cyclone, life sort of stopped. As you see here, I was diagnosed with diabetes, and I felt like my life had stopped. Having said that, I went through what happens to many of us. which is why me. I have a reasonably good lifestyle. I don't eat too badly. I don't have pizzas and burgers every day. Um, why should this happen to me? Of course, in my case, on my father's side, I have a very strong family history. In fact, 100% of my relatives on my father's side have or had diabetes, many of whom have since passed away, and some of them at a fairly young age. So it was a real warning sign for me to realize that I was going down that route and I needed to do something about it. And so I sort of reached this point. This picture is from a place close to Aberdeen in Scotland, where I was at that time. The village is actually called Lost. And so I was lost with a map at that stage of my life, because as a physician, I knew what was wrong. I knew what diabetes was, that I had a genetic problem of diabetes. I even knew what were the guidelines that I used to advise on my patients to say, this is how you control your diabetes. However, you are down the road of this condition, which is endless. It'll never go away. It might actually get worse over time, and we have to try our best to get better. And so there I was with my little map uh, pointing towards being lost. And why did I say that? I said, I know the guidelines. I'm a doctor. I use this to my patients. I'll use them to bring things under control. Unfortunately, even today, I mean, this is 2010, even today's guidelines, 2020 guidelines, basically say things like eat a balanced diet, eat high fiber, low glycemic index. And some people might know this, just basically things that don't push your sugar too high. So you can still have fruits and vegetables and whole grains and pulses, have low fat. And remember low fat, because I'm going to challenge that in the next few slides. Dairy products, oily fish, and then control the intake of food containing saturated fats and trans fats. So and remember here, fats, because that's another thing that we will be challenging today. So that was my roadmap when I was lost, and that's what I was following, broadly speaking, under the guidance of obviously my doctor. And this is what happened. So I've been charting my journey since then. And anybody who's been my friend, colleague, patient uh, will know they all get one of these, and we track this together so that it keeps us on the path we want to be, but also gives us motivation to know where we want to go. So I'll firstly talk about HbA1c, which is, as you know, a indicator of how diabetes is going in the medium term. So it gives an indication of diabetic control over the last 3 months. So if we go to the beginning, first time point is target. So 6.5 is the cutoff for diabetes. Anything above that is, anything above 6.5 is considered diabetic. So obviously, when I was diagnosed in September 2010, I was around 7.4. Um, then I went on medication, brought it down to about 6.5. But as you can see, over the next 2 to 3 years, there's been a gradual rise towards 7. Then my dose was doubled. So I was on metformin 500, it went to 1,000, came back down, tried to be more sort of well-behaved. But as you can see from 2016, there was a steady rise. And December 2018 was my sort of watershed moment. I went for a checkup, a routine checkup, as it happens in the UK, and was shocked to see my HbA1c was 7.8. And of course, my blood pressure for the first time had also gone up to 150 over 100. And at that point, I thought, yes, this is the beginning of the end. My genes have finally taken over, and my fate is going to be like others in my gene pool, my family, extended family. And it really pulled me down. I came home fairly demoralized, and over the next sort of 15 days, started doing my own research, my own reading, to think about other ways of managing my condition. And here we are. So 3 months after that, I went for my HbA1c test. So this was April 2019. And at that point, my HbA1c was back to normal, 6.5, normal as in for diabetes, 6.5. And more importantly, my blood pressure was down to 130/80. So with intermittent fasting, I was able to bring things under control within 3 months. And my regime, my system that I developed, I then started talking to my family and friends about it, who also were happy to be my guinea pigs. Thank you all who are here today to follow that plan. And we've had very good success. And then it went on to people saying, I should start sharing this with everyone. So here we are today to talk more about it. Of the 30 odd people that I've had the fortune of treating this way, just over half are diabetics. 5 of them were on insulin. All of them are insulin free now. The eldest is about 89 years old, one of my uncles. The youngest is, I think, about 24. So it's been amazing. And there's no reason why you could not do the same thing. Right, so let's bust some myths in the beginning before we go further. So we all sort of think about weight in terms of this sort of balance, like a bank balance. What you put in and what you get out is how these things work. So if you want to reduce weight, just eat less or exercise more, and you should be able to manage it. You'll hear people who say, yeah, I can eat whatever I want. I just go for a run and everything's fine. But we know that doesn't always work. Many of us have tried it. It might work for a short time, but then it stops working. And there's good science behind it. Let's start with what you can do by way of exercise. So even if you were a very sincere person in terms of exercise, which I'm not, this is the rough numbers you can estimate to sort of burn off. So if you're about 60 to 80 kilos, and this is 1 hour of exercise, since you're exercising, for example, running for 1 hour, you'll be burning between 600 to 800 calories. If you're going for a walk, it's around 250 to 300 calories. And most of us would probably do about 30 minutes sincerely every day, probably not 60 minutes, but let's aim for 60 minutes. The problem we have is this. The problem is that today's food is so calorie dense that before even you started your day, this is a skinny latte, so it's low fat, 135 calories, and a muffin or whatever else. It might be paratha or a bowl of cornflakes or whatever else you're having. We've already taken in between 400 to 500 calories very, very early in the day, and the day is still in front of us. So you can see how if you just stuck to a modern way of eating, you'd probably have to live in the gym, exercising, just to be able to burn off what you have been taking in. So I hope this convinces you that purely exercise by way of weight management is just not an option. I'm not saying exercise is bad. Exercise is absolutely good. It has many, many other benefits, including helping in controlling diabetes and blood sugar, but it's not a strategy for weight loss or any of the other conditions that come with it. The other option, people say, oh, I'm just going to eat the way I do. I'll just eat slightly less. The first thing is, okay, so the total number of calories I'm going to take is slightly lower, what books or literature will call calorie restriction. So I'm still going to have my 3 meals a day, probably a snack with my tea at 11 o'clock and a snack with my tea at 4 o'clock. But I'll just eat slightly less. I'll just remain slightly hungry all day long, and slowly I will reduce weight. So the number of calories going in is lesser, although my exercise has not changed, but I'm going to work it that way. And initially, you will lose weight. There is no doubt. All of us have probably done this in our life at some point. New Year's, summer holidays, or whatever was the motivation, somebody's wedding, your wedding, or your friend's wedding, and you thought, right, I'm going to eat less, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to fit into that beautiful dress, and I'm going to look great. And initially, you will see results because the amount of energy going into your body is lower than what it was. The problem is that very soon it stops working. And this is what most studies show, that over a 12-month period, you will hit a plateau if you consistently did this. Of course, you might stop within 3 months, but let's keep going. There are no studies in this world to show sustained or sustainable weight loss beyond 12 months by purely calorie restriction. And there's a good reason for this. So largely what happens is if you restrict your calories, all the hormones in our body will just slowly start readjusting themselves. So this lower amount of energy coming into our body. And you'll hear this. I used to hear it from my patients who would say, I feel tired all the time. I'm low energy. I feel cold. My mood is slightly off. I'm irritable. And even if I just look at food, if I smell food, I feel hungry and I gain weight. And I'm one of those doctors who is guilty of saying, oh, no, no, you're not probably telling me the whole truth. You're probably quietly eating more than you should. And you're definitely eating more than I've been telling you. You're just not telling me. You probably don't have good psychological control. You should have better self-control. And we would just blame the patient. We blame the victim rather than understanding the science. But now we do understand the science. And the science says that in reality, what happens is all the hormones have now reset. So your total energy expenditure, your basal metabolic rate, has slowed down because you're taking less calories. So this doesn't work. You'll hit a plateau and you just can't lose weight. You might even start gaining weight. And you will find that when you do this, it's just not sustainable. Third option, I eat a traditional diet. My parents have done this. I've done this all my life. I'll continue to follow a traditional diet. How can it be wrong? It's worked for centuries. It should work for me. So I'll stick to what my parents ate and I ate as a child. Depending on which part of the world you came from, this could be a rice-based meal plan. It could be a wheat, a roti or paratha-based wheat plan. Whatever it was, that's what we ate. And why doesn't it work anymore? Most of us are not those people who eat pizzas and burgers and drink endless amounts of Coke every day. And then why are we gaining weight? And the reason is that the rice, the wheat that we ate as a child or our parents ate is not the same that we are eating today. It's highly hybridized. It's super refined, effectively factory manufactured with hardly any fiber in it. I've just taken a picture of a label from a bag of rice, and you can see it's almost 80% carbohydrates in it with hardly any fiber. Um, uh, if you buy bread today, you can leave it at home and it doesn't develop fungus anymore because it's so highly processed. It's almost like eating plastic. And that's the reason why traditional diets don't work anymore. You look at demographic data, most of Asian countries, Southeast Asia, Far East, were always carbohydrate based, were always rice based. The prevalence of diabetes, obesity was between 2 to 3%. In the last 20 years, is ranging around 10 to 12%. In the West, of course, it's way, way worse, more than 50%. But even in the East, where we still sort of eat traditional diets, we're still hitting very, very high numbers. And in cities in India, obesity is already hitting 40 to 45%. And most of us still have a traditional diet. This is the reason why that also doesn't work anymore. I know millets have become very popular and there are all sorts of millets. They've got lots of different names and different sort of properties. Depending on which part of the country you come from, you might be eating millets in different sorts of ways. Millets has its own positives. It's environment friendly. It doesn't need too much water. It's high in minerals like calcium, magnesium, and so on. But at the end of the day, it is a seed. And so just replacing millets does not really work. So if you pick up most of these millets, the highest, or rather the lowest amount of carbohydrates you're still getting is about 60 to 65%. Compare that to wheat, 70%, and rice, 78%. It's not too far away. Compare proteins, roughly the same. So the best one, 12%, wheat, 11.8%. So it's not very different. Fats, slightly better, 4 to 5% compared to 1 to 1.5% here. So what I'm trying to say is, even if you move to a millet-based sort of meal plan, if you're not reducing the amount of millets or reducing the amount of carbohydrates you eat, it's not really going to show you the same results. Initially, you might see slight differences because of this sort of 10 to 15% drop in carbohydrates. But apart from that, you might find you're still hitting a plateau, even though you've moved to millets. So this is effectively what's happening. We are looking at the tip of an iceberg. of processed, refined carbohydrates with very little fiber. And this, because it doesn't require any significant amount of digestion, it goes straight into our blood as pure sugar, which then triggers a very severe insulin response. And what does insulin do? Insulin's job is to put sugar back into cells. So that's what it'll do. And when that's not an option, it'll push it into the liver. Liver will store a little bit as glycogen, but the rest is converted into fat. And that's why we gain fat, even though we think we are not eating fat. We gain fat because we're eating just too much sugar, sometimes without realizing it. So this could be in the form of pure sugar in some things, and then other forms of carbohydrates, which then break down into sugar. Even if you're eating brown bread, for example, or fruits, which might be considered healthy. Fruits are healthy, but we are probably eating too much fruit that we don't need. Right. So just by way of a quick understanding of sugar, a normal sugar, you might have heard, is about 100 milligrams in 100 milliliters of blood, 100 milligrams per deciliter of blood. We have about 5 liters of blood in our body. So if you multiply that by a 1,000, we are at 1,000 milligrams of sugar in our blood, in circulation in our blood at any given time, which is 5 grams. So you've got 1 spoon of sugar in your blood circulating at any given time. Now, if you add 2 spoons of sugar to your tea, you've just doubled your blood sugar. That's how bad it is, right? We are just talking of a cup of tea that you've had compared to all the other things you might eat. So just by way of equivalence, for example, if you have a portion of rice, you've added 14 spoons of sugar to your blood. And then you can imagine the amount of work your pancreas has to do to generate insulin, and your insulin has to do to push it into cells, and so on, down that whole chain. And then very soon, our body says, that's enough, we can't take this anymore. And that's how we develop something called insulin resistance, and then type 2 diabetes. So why doesn't it work? Or even when it works, it's not sustainable in the long term. I hope I've convinced you as to why that is, for all these reasons. And this is the science behind it. If I ask you to remember one thing from this lecture, please remember this chart, because this is what's happening in our body when we eat food. So let's go with the red one first, which is glucose or carbohydrates. When we eat anything which is carbohydrate rich or which will convert into glucose, our insulin will jump very, very quickly to a very, very high level. It'll stay there for a long period of time and then slowly come down. Everything will trigger insulin. If we have proteins, it'll go up very slowly and to a much lower level and recover more quickly. And then if we eat fats, it's a much smaller curve, but it will trigger insulin. Anything you eat will trigger insulin. And as I said, the job of insulin is to push every ounce of sugar into your cells or convert it into fat. That's all it does. That's all it is doing. So until we fix insulin, we can't fix anything in our body. That's the real hack. And if we go through the list of what insulin does, this is what it does. So because it pushes, it promotes sugar storage and fat storage, it also triggers hunger so that we have good stores at any given time. Of course, in today's world, it's become counterproductive because there's too much of everything around us and we don't need to feel hungry, but we do. And then it pushes sugar into the liver, stores it as fat. It promotes fat deposition, especially in our abdominal organs. And that's another sort of genetic disadvantage we grow up as Indians, because even though we might be thin people, we all have abdominal fat. We always have a pot belly. There's this term called TOFI, T-O-F-I, thin on the outside, but fat on the inside. And insulin is the cause for that, because insulin sticks or rather pushes fat around our abdominal organs. The next point is really, really important. You cannot burn fat if insulin level is high. The first step of moving fat from your fat store is controlled by an enzyme, and that enzyme is blocked by insulin. So if your insulin levels are high, you cannot burn fat. You have to burn another energy source. You just cannot burn fat. And then finally, insulin promotes salt and water retention by the kidney. And for the doctor colleagues here, you know this, when you put your patients on insulin, they get something called insulin edema, and that's because of salt and water retention by the kidney. And so that is another reason why people will feel bloated and gain weight and have high blood pressure. So once we reduce insulin, that's how blood pressure goes down, bloating goes away, and of course we start getting better. And that's why the key thing to understand is the only solution is to keep insulin levels low. Everything else that we've talked about above doesn't work simply because we haven't been able to reduce our insulin levels. So what are the solutions? The next part is largely about what do we eat and when do we eat. I think I've made a fairly convincing case. I hope you are convinced that the culprit here is carbohydrates, and we need to reduce anything that comes from a factory or manufacturing process of any sort, because that takes away all the good fiber from that natural source that we had. So once it goes through a machine, it's destroyed. It's not good for us anymore. So we need to reduce refined foods. We need to identify hidden sugars. I've given you a list. I mean, it's amazing how the food industry has come up with innovative ways of not telling you you're eating sugar. And some of them are just amazing. Maltose extract, for example, malt dextrin. One might not even think that's sugar, but it is. The other thing that I really, really need to impress upon you is ban anything that says low fat. This is absolutely the reason for the obesity epidemic in the last 20, 30 years. When manufacturers were told, and we scientific community were part of this, we thought eating fat makes you fat. Eating fat gives you cholesterol, which gives you heart disease and will kill you. Therefore, don't eat fat. And we stopped eating all fat. Now, I'll give you reasons why that is not the case. And there are good fats that we should eat, like our ancestors did. But anyway, so if let's say there was 100 grams of something that you were buying, and it had 20 grams of fat in it, and the manufacturers were told, take the fat out. So they took out 20 grams of fat. Now you're left with 80 grams of that thing that you were going to buy. So manufacturers had to put something back in to make it back to 100 grams, because now it was only 80 grams. Therefore, they started adding all these forms of sugar to make it back up to 100, because they couldn't add fat to it. And of course, sugar is good on taste. It makes you feel hungry. So it was great for manufacturers because you would buy more and you would eat more. Just like that slogan says, nobody can eat just one. We ended up eating loads and loads of whatever was in front of us. So we were eating more, and we were eating more carbohydrates. So do not buy from today onwards anything that says low fat. Just ban it from your house, because that will make you fat. It's loaded with refined carbohydrates. It will make you fat. So what we eat is really, really important. It doesn't matter whether you're a vegetarian or non-vegetarian. Here is an example. This is what I like to eat, the top panel. That's effectively some sort of tandoori fried chicken, a whole bunch of salad. Again, whatever is available at any given time is absolutely fine. Ideally, anything that grows above the ground is perfect, because there is very little starch in it. It's loaded with fiber, all the antioxidants, everything else, all the vitamins you need. It's shining because it has 2 spoons of olive oil in it. That is, again, a very, very good thing to have. And the little white pieces are cheese. And again, you can choose the type of cheese that you like or is available. Put it in there for supplementing good fats into our diet. So the only carbohydrate you see in that plate is in the form of vegetables. These are complex carbohydrates, mainly fibers. They don't cause weight gain. They regulate our bowel. They promote good bacteria in our gut, giving us all the right things. What's in the corner there, sorry, it has got cut off, is a bowl of curd or yogurt, full fat. Please remember, full fat yogurt. It's got some fruits and berries in it, blueberries and things like that. You can also put nuts, dried fruits like badam, akhrot, walnuts, all those type of things. Again, make it a nice and tasty treat. And for people who can't give up fruit, have some of the less sweet fruit in your curd or yogurt. so you don't have to use sugar for it. My wife prefers vegetarian, so that's paneer, but otherwise everything else is very, very similar. Good masala. Uh, Whatever you eat should be fun. There should be at no point the feeling that this is not fun, because then it will not be sustainable. You will give up, right? So we need a good balance of proteins, fats, fiber, some carbohydrates, not just the refined carbohydrates. That's the very, very important thing. So what not to eat? And here's some very, very good evidence. Again, sorry for too many graphs and charts, but hopefully the more scientific among you will enjoy this. So if you follow the first one, a standard diet. So you can follow the meals during the day, and as you can see, insulin spikes every time you obviously eat a standard diet, which has a fair amount of carbohydrate. Take out carbohydrate from there, CHO is carbohydrate, and these peaks and troughs become much flatter. So you can see that insulin is not rising that high, which means we'll not gain as much weight. We will be able to burn fat and derive all the benefits. And then add fasting to that, and you can see insulin almost doesn't peak at all, which means fat gates can open, fat can be burned, and you'll start losing weight. Okay, so that is why not eating carbohydrates is really, really very, very useful. When should we eat? Um, we've already talked about flattening the curve, surging hormones of insulin. Of course, these days we're talking about other flattening of curves in terms of COVID, but here also it's equally important. And when we talk about when to eat, we are really talking about intermittent fasting. And in intermittent fasting, both words are really, really important, intermittent and fasting. And for this, I'll take you to a little story into our past. So when we were cavemen and women, we lived in groups. We went out to hunt, or if we were more sort of vegetarianly inclined, we might go and find a tree with fruits in it. We brought it home. Everybody sat around, ate it, had a feast, enjoyed ourselves, probably overate, and then relaxed until the next time we found something that we could eat. And that could be a few days, it could be a few weeks. The body was designed for that. The body was designed for feasting and fasting. So the next time you might be able to kill a deer might be a week later. Who knows? The next time you'd find a tree with good fruit in it might be 5 days later. Who knows? That did not mean we just lay in the cave and died. If that was to happen, we wouldn't be here today. Clearly, that's not what happens to our bodies. What happens to our bodies is when your carbohydrate metabolism cannot run anymore because you've exhausted all your sugar stores, your body moves into fat burning system. But in addition, what happens is what are called as counter regulatory hormones. So things like your adrenaline, cortisol, growth hormone, testosterone, all these start rising because your body tells, if you don't feed me, I'm going to die. Please go and find more food. And so we would go out again in our search for food. And what we have now learned is that because of these counter-regulatory hormones, what the other benefits we derive from fasting is that we had to work together in teams. So our team working skills are better. Our problem solving skills are better. How do we outfox the deer that we want to kill? So our problem solving skills, our lateral thinking skills are better, and we are more alert. Think about the last time you had a high carbohydrate meal, you got brain fog and you probably had to lie down, especially after a lunch. You couldn't work. You probably wanted to have a nap. Whereas on the days that you missed a meal, your brain was absolutely alert. You could keep going. If anything, you were buzzing with more energy than you would if you had had a meal. And that's really what happens. So fasting, we know scientifically that fasting promotes better problem solving skills, better team working skills, better lateral thinking, and therefore promotes further progression in your workplace because you can use the same skills if you start fasting. Let's move to more modern times when we were settled farmers. And if you think about, again, going back to your village, most people don't wake up in the morning and have a breakfast. In fact, if you think about it, when we wake up in the morning, we are not hungry. We probably have a cup of tea. We have breakfast at whatever time you have, 8 or 9 o'clock, because that's habit. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, was generated by the cereal makers who didn't know what to do with cereal. So they said, oh, everybody should have breakfast. There's no need for breakfast. The body, as you know, blood sugar is pretty normal in the morning. Like I said, around 100. Body's hormones will take care of that, and they can make any amount of sugar that our body needs. You've heard about essential amino acids. These are protein molecules, amino acids, which we need, without which we cannot function. You've heard about essential fatty acids, the omega-3s and all those things, without which our body cannot function. We have to take them. We have to take essential amino acids. We have to take essential fatty acids. You've never heard of essential carbohydrates. There are no carbohydrates in this world that you have to take, because without them you will die. They do not exist. Our body can make as much carbohydrate, as much sugar as we need. There is no need to take sugar. There's no need to take carbohydrates. There is nothing called low sugar, right? That feeling of low sugar is completely different. I'll talk about that later. Coming to our farmer in the village, even probably today. So they don't have breakfast in the morning. They pack their food, go to the fields, work probably till about 11, 12, whenever is their lunchtime, sit under a tree, have a meal, and then continue to work. And then they have a second meal before sunset, and then go to bed. So this construct of breakfast is the most important meal of the day is another myth that needs to be broken. It's not required. Okay. So ketones and hormones actually are our friends. So when we burn fat, our body generates something called ketones, which actually our brain loves. It works really well on ketones. In fact, it's used for medicinal purposes in children with epilepsy that's not responding to treatment. It's that good, right? We just forgot how to use it. So let's talk more about fasting. This is what is roughly happening in our body when we are fasting. So let's say you've had, let's call this your dinner at 7, 8, or 9 p.m., whatever is your usual time. Your body at that point is obviously using the energy you've just fed it. Once you've stopped eating, obviously you're fasting. Technically, you're fasting because you're not eating anymore. Initially, your body will use up all the food you've just given it and will use that amount of sugar as energy. Thereafter, it'll go to the liver. Liver has about 150 grams of sugar in the form of glycogen. That's used up as the second source of energy. Once we've used all that up, we have reached roughly the sort of 12-hour mark. And then slowly our body starts moving towards exhausting all its sugar-based sources. There's a little bit of sugar in muscle, although muscle glycogen cannot be used by other cells. It's primarily there for muscle, but there are other sources which can be utilized. The key thing to understand is the 16-hour mark. So you get this very sharp decline in insulin. We are looking at insulin here. So as our sugar drops off, insulin levels start dropping off. And the magic point, this turnover point, is around 16 hours. There's a little bounce off, but for people who know their science, this is a log-shaped curve. And log-shaped curves tend to have a steep part and a flatter part. And that magic number is 16 hours. So at 16 hours, we have dropped 70% of our basal insulin levels. And at this point, our fat stores can open and our body can move into fat burning system. And that's why this number of 16 hours is really, really important. Because if you don't hit 16 hours, you don't get that benefit of fat burning. If you go beyond 16 hours, this continues. Of course, the slope is slightly flatter, but you can keep going. My longest fast is about 84 hours. Don't worry, it's not scary at all. I look exactly the way I'm looking today. In fact, on most days that I'm on call, I'll go at least 48 hours without a meal. Your brain is clear. Ketones make you work really well. Your body is running on fat. In fact, if you think about all marathon runners, they all run on fat. Only sprint runners run on sugar. It's fine. Your brain is calm. Your body is on autopilot. My team is really happy. I'm not grumpy. I don't shout at my juniors. Work happens much better. My patients are also happy. So it can be done. But the minimum number is 16 hours. Right. Now, how you do it is absolutely up to you. Do not fall for anybody telling you there is only one way, it is their way or the highway. If you don't do it their way, you will not see benefits. That is absolute bunkum. And hopefully I've convinced you based on all the evidence I've just shown you. As long as you can achieve a 16-hour fasting window, you will get benefit. And here, I'll give you some examples. There's somebody who I was treating, a relative of mine, who said, I cannot skip breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but I want to do this. So we said, okay, what time do you want to have your breakfast? 9 a.m. Okay, so your feeding window, I would prefer the term feasting window because that's what our ancestors did. So your feasting window opens at 9 o'clock. You have your breakfast. What that means is that your window will close in 8 hours. And that's the key thing. So if you ate at 9 o'clock, you have to finish your last meal by 5 o'clock. What you eat in between is none of my concern. I mean, within limits, but I'm not trying to say you have to eat only once or twice or 3 times. It doesn't really matter. Of course, if you're diabetic, there'll be other restrictions, but in the broad sense of what is required, all I'm saying is whatever you were eating, reduce it to an 8-hour window. That's all. So that for the remaining 16 hours, your body is not being fed in any shape or form. If you eat 2000 calories, eat 2000 calories. You should never feel deprived of anything. The fun of food, just like I've showed you pictures, I'll show you more pictures. The fun of food should continue in the brain, that you feel happy, you feel satisfied, and in your stomach, that your stomach is full. That should always be there. So for this relative of mine, breakfast at 9 o'clock, lunch at 12, dinner at 5 p.m. is what he did. Lost about 15 kilos of weight, HbA1c from 10 down to 6.5. He looks amazing. He looks much younger. I hope one day he'll join us. He's in a different country, so time zone is a problem. But anyway, and there are some other friends of ours who will probably will be able to tell you their stories. The point I'm trying to make is the 8-hour feeding window is your choice. So some people will have an early dinner, but not skip breakfast. Some people will have dinner on their own time, but have a late breakfast. It's up to you. Let's say you're having a party on Saturday. You know, by the time you'll have dinner on that day, it'll be about 10 o'clock at night. You'll have a few drinks. Nothing wrong with having a few drinks. Only avoid carbohydrate drinks. So no beer, lager, all that. Have hard liquor, no problem. Absolutely no problem. So let's say you have dinner at 10 p.m. Your feeding window, your feeding window closes at 10 p.m. Count your 16 hours from there. So next morning, 10 o'clock is your 12 hours. 4 hours more takes you to 2 p.m. You have lunch at 2 p.m. You're still fasting for 16 hours. Next day, do something else. Whatever you want to do. Absolutely no problem. Some people have moved to a 18-6 cycle. If you can, do that. If you struggle to get to 16, not a problem. This is not a diet. This is not a fad. This is where we are changing our life. You might say, okay, every day I will add another 15 minutes to before I eat something, 30 minutes to before I eat something, 1 hour to before I eat something. You might start with 12 hours. Before you know, it'll be 13, 14, 15, 16. It might take you 2 weeks to get there. It might take you 1 month to get there. Doesn't matter. The point is we have to get there. Some people like to sprint. Some people like to walk. Some people like to run. Doesn't matter. The destination is the most important thing. We want to create a system which is sustainable. We've all tried one method or the other. Diets, diet plans, meal plans, running, jogging, exercising, everything. And in the end, here we are, right? We want to create a system which is sustainable for years to come, for the rest of our life. And therefore, that is the most important thing. Everything else is irrelevant, right? Very, very important to also remember, intermittent fasting means it has to be intermittent. Do not do it every day. If you do it every day, your body will get used to it. You will go into the low energy system. You will hit a plateau. You will start gaining weight. And I'm sure there are others here who've tried it before, and that's why they hit a plateau. That's why they realize it's not working, because you did not cheat enough. So at least once a week, if required twice a week, break all the rules. If you are waiting to eat biryani, eat biryani. If you're waiting to eat mangoes, eat mangoes. Whatever you love to eat that. Chocolates, there is no restriction as long as you eat dark chocolate, because it has very high fat and less sugar. But milk chocolate and fruit and nut and all that, better avoid it. Nuts are good. Dark chocolate is good. Don't worry about it. But have at least one cheat day every week. possibly twice. If you're a diabetic, I would say 1 cheat day. If you're a non-diabetic, you can probably have 2 cheat days. In summary, this is what we're talking about. So you eat carbohydrates, you get this huge rise in insulin, promoting fat retention. Add a little bit of fat and protein, no real difference, doesn't really help. But once you take away carbohydrates, you start seeing these benefits. Restrict carbohydrates, amazing benefits, even before you start fasting. Start fasting, exponential improvement, and then you can add some exercise, ideally during fasting. That's absolutely perfect. We'll talk about exercise if people want to talk about it. But remember, again, traditionally, we always exercised on an empty stomach. In school, we had PT first thing in the morning. Our parents did yoga first thing in the morning. Those of my military friends, we always had PT first thing in the morning. Fasting exercise is the best exercise. It burns off all the glycogen in our muscles. Our muscles have about 450 grams of glycogen for that sprint run. In the forest, when you were chased by a tiger, you had to sprint. That's where the stored glycogen was used for. So you exercise in fasting state, you burn off all that glycogen. Now you're ready to burn fat and get better. Now, this again is a thing we might remember from school, that 1 gram of carbohydrate gives 4 calories, as does protein, but 1 gram of fat gives us about 9 calories of energy. So fat is a very efficient energy source. For gram, it will give twice as amount of energy to our body than proteins and carbohydrates. So we have to eat way more carbohydrates and fats to get the same amount of energy. We can eat lesser amount of fat and get more energy. It's a very, very efficient way. Our cells know how to metabolize fat. So if 1 gram of fat gives us 8 to 9 calories, and all of us, let's assume, have at least 1 kg of fat somewhere in our body, that means we have about 8 to 9,000 calories sitting in our body at any given time. If the average person uses 2,000 calories per day, that is about 4 days of energy in our body if you stopped eating anything, right? If you did not eat for 4 days, your body can still sustain you based on 1 kg of fat. That's how much energy we have. So don't worry about fasting. Nobody dies of starvation if it's done properly, of course. Those pictures that we saw of extreme malnutrition and starvation in remote parts of the world were of a different time. To trigger starvation mode, our body fat has to be less than 4% of our body, which is very, very difficult to have. You and I will not hit that. Even Gandhiji, who used to fast for 15, 20 days, never went into starvation mode, never collapsed and died. It does not happen. Right? The world record for fasting, by the way, is 1 year, just over 1 year. So nothing to worry about from that point of view. We have enough energy stores in our body to keep us going. This is another concept that is really, really important to understand, that when we are eating, when we have energy, you can either burn sugar as your source of energy or fat. And again, for the biochemically minded, you'll remember that there's something called the Krebs cycle or the TCA cycle, and so on and so forth. But how you go into that has to be either through a glucose pathway or through a fat pathway. Unfortunately, both cannot run at the same time. So your cells have to switch between fat burning and sugar burning. You cannot just eat more fat and more sugar and hope that you'll somehow remain in fat burning mode. Sadly, that's not how it works. So in a fed state, we are burning sugar because that's what we are giving, and we are driving it through insulin. In a fasted state, as you see here below, you reduce your insulin and can burn fat. That's really, really important to understand. And this is the outcome of that. So if you just kept eating less food, chronic calorie restriction, still having 3 meals a day, just little less food, this is what happens. You plateau off because your insulin plateaus off. But if you intermittently fast, your body thinks you're still in high energy system, even though you are tricking your body into burning fast, but restricting the way you supply energy. So what are the other benefits? Think about this. We already knew about all these benefits. Every major religion, custom, cult following in this world promotes fasting. Whether that's Navaratri, Ramzan, Lent and Christmas, and Buddhism and Jainism, of course, very heavy on fasting. Every religion has some form of fasting in it because everyone understood that fasting has multiple benefits in addition to just weight control. And here I'll start moving you away from all the other benefits you can derive through fasting. So you can control your appetite. Ketones are appetite suppressants. And that's why, again, amongst the doctors amongst in this group, you'll know when your patient with diabetic ketoacidosis comes around, they don't feel hungry. In fact, they might have nausea and vomiting. It's only when you treat them that their hunger returns. Ketones are very good appetite suppressants. So once you go into fat burning mode, hunger will disappear. And I'll talk more about that later on. It obviously controls your sugar, very good for cardiovascular health because it improves your lipid profile. It has some benefits in chemotherapy. So resistance to side effects of chemotherapy is becoming a very, very big thing. In fact, there are studies to show that extreme fasting can prevent cancer and so on. Metabolism remains fast. And of course, growth hormone goes up, which I will talk about later again. It's good for your immune system. There are good studies to show patients with rheumatoid arthritis, for example, can go into remission with intermittent fasting. And similarly, other diseases that we've been talking about, like hypertension, diabetes, cholesterol, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And like I said, ketones really, really help us in that. Combine ketones with exercise and even more benefit. And like I said, in a fasting state, it really, really works. This is the very simplistic representation of what happens. Glucose, of course, brain likes glucose. Brain can use glucose, but that's the way thinking works when you're on sugar burning. Whereas when you're in ketone burning, your brain is nice and calm. It is better at problem solving, team working, and executive function. It's a different state. You have to experience it to realize it is amazing. This I've sort of touched upon again, the traditional glucose fuel and ketone-based fuel. Muscle mass, sorry, that slide should have said here. Like I said, when you're fasting, growth hormone levels go up because traditionally growth hormone drops as we get older. The only way to raise your growth hormone is to sleep. And so sleep is really, really important. Sleep is also important for fasting, but it also rises with fasting. And so one way of maintaining your muscle mass and maintaining your physical fitness is by fasting, because your growth hormone levels will remain higher, which means you'll have more lean body mass because of fasting. Similarly, testosterone, it's not only for men, even for women. So testosterone is really important for bone health and other reasons. But for men who want to feel, what is the word, strong, virile, it's really useful. A word of caution about thyroid levels. So some people who have hypothyroidism might find that their blood tests slightly may slightly change. Speak to your doctor about it or speak to me about it. I can explain it. It's not a problem, but it can worry people that your thyroid hormone levels have changed. And then this is probably the reason why I continue to fast now, which is autophagy. Professor Okisumi won the Nobel Prize in 2016 because he showed that our body is able to heal ourselves. One of the ways it does that is through autophagy, which is eat yourself. As you know, we recycle all our cells on a regular basis. But when you fast, what that does is the body has to recycle faster because the ingredients that would have come through food now are not available, which means that it has to find these ingredients by destroying cells that are getting older and recycle them to make new cells. So let's say if you were changing, let's say 5% of your body every day, if you were fasting, you might start changing 6 or 7% of your body every day, which means very slowly you become younger and younger version of yourself. If you are all destined to live 80 years or 90 years, why live 40 years as a young person and 40 years as an older person? Why not live young for 60, 70 years? And because of autophagy, again, you'll notice that people who do extreme diets lose a lot of fat. Their skin tends to sag. They develop wrinkles. But when your skin is keeping pace, it is also restructuring itself. As you're losing fat, your skin remains taut. It remains nice and shiny. People have told me that. I hope you also appreciate that. I've lost weight. Obviously, I've lost about 8 kilos of weight in controlling my diabetes and blood pressure, but there's been no change to my skin. If anything, I feel my skin is better. From the inside, I'm way, way better. My joints don't creak when I go up and down stairs. My exercise tolerance is much better. So physically also, I've become more fit now than I was before. That's probably everything that I have already said about autophagy. A few quick slides about hunger. I don't want to eat into your discussion time. So obviously we need to think about hunger. Now we understand all the hormones related to hunger. So it's not about I'm a weak person, so I don't have self-control. I have to blame myself because my diet doesn't work, or I cannot have self-control, so I end up snacking. The reason we are who we are is because of this hormone called ghrelin, which makes us feel hungry, and this hormone called leptin, which makes us feel full. So once we eat, leptin is supposed to come in and say, that's it, we've eaten enough, stop. And it comes from our fat cells, and ghrelin comes in to say, I'm feeling hungry, feed me right now. Unfortunately, some of the food items, especially the manufactured food items, mess with this balance. And that's why we end up eating more, because we continue to feel hungry. Bottom line is this. So if you have done any sort of fasting, you'll know that hunger doesn't sort of go in a steep line. It actually goes up and down through the day. So you'll get a hunger pang. If you ignore it, or you have a glass of water or a mug of coffee, hunger disappears. And then it comes back again, and then it disappears, and then it comes back again. That's all that there is. And that's what is this pulsatile nature in which ghrelin is released. If you tide over that period, hunger will disappear. So it comes back to the psychology of hunger rather than the physiology of hunger, because the body just looks for food. And if you don't give it food, it says, okay, I'm going to my fat stores to provide energy, carry on. But we give it food, which then means we give it too much energy. And then you might have heard of this term called hangry, where we are hungry and angry, which is a very common side effect. So let's quickly touch upon the common side effects you might have heard. Commonest being, if I don't eat, I get a headache. And as soon as I eat, my headache goes away. The reality is headache is a very good sign, because it shows your body is moving into fat burning system. It's generating ketones. Ketones open up the blood circulation in our brain, which is what causes the headache. It also happens because we are dehydrated. 50% of our water comes from food. So if you're not eating food, enough food, in the sense because you're fasting, you will get dehydrated. So it's very, very important to drink lots of water. Like I said, when your insulin is low, salt will be lost. So it's important to take some salt supplements, and by that, headache will go away. Initially, if you need paracetamol, if you need a painkiller, take it, no problem. Your body will get used to it in 2 to 3 days, and headaches will disappear. It's just a matter of adapting to a new system of living. Constipation, again, because your eating habits have changed, some people develop constipation. But if you're having a good amount of natural fiber in the form of salads, all the sabji we all make, whether it's beans and things like that, all that cooked vegetables, excellent. Keep those in your diet, and constipation should not be a problem. If it does, again, if you need medicine, take it. It will go away. Cramps, I'm saying not abdominal, but muscle cramps. And that is again an indicator of dehydration and salt depletion. So you have to take salt and water supplements. Nimbu pani, or lemonade, but without sugar, put salt in it, is what I always recommend to people. Every 1 or 2 hours, have half a glass or a glass of water, put a bit of salt, few drops of lemon, is perfect. And it'll keep you going very, very nicely. It'll expand your stomach, so the ghrelin signal will also go away. You'll not feel hungry. Hunger, I think we've talked about. Inability to fall asleep is a very, very interesting one. For people who slightly do more extreme fasting, so 24 hours usually or longer, they tend to have this, but it can happen to anyone. This is because ketones are obviously buzzing your brain. You're so pumped up thanks to ketones, you want to do more stuff. Your brain wants to do more stuff. Although your clock is saying you need to go to bed, your brain is ready for action. And that's why initially you'll find you can't fall asleep. Again, have some water, relax, read a book, whatever it takes, it will go away. Don't eat, because as soon as you eat, you will fall asleep, because now you're in a carbohydrate coma, right? So don't do that. You'll break your fast. And don't worry about blood sugar swings. Like I said, there's nothing called low sugar, unless, of course, you're diabetic, you're on a medicine which can cause low sugar. I would recommend you don't start this till you've spoken to a doctor or spoken with me personally. Ketones are your friend. Ketones will do great. You will not develop ketoacidosis. That happens only in type 1 diabetics and in a very small group of people with type 2 who are on certain types of medicines. And that again, please speak to your doctor before you do this. Otherwise, ketoacidosis is not ketosis. It will not happen. It will not cause any serious problems. So not to worry about that. So in summary, I hope I've convinced you that intermittent fasting can solve many of our modern day problems. It has a role to play in managing your weight, diabetes, cholesterol, and other conditions. It can help you in other ways in your brain and your body. Hunger can be controlled now that we understand how it works. It can be done by what we eat and when we eat. We understand what are the side effects and how to control them. And so we can do that. Just to remind you, this is public service presentation. Here are some of the examples of food. So I'll open it up for discussion now. And in the meantime, while we are preparing for that, I'll quickly walk you through some of the food items that are displayed here. So if I start from the left top, those are about 6 or 7 kebabs that have been fried in ghee. That's a standard dal, any lentil with 2 spoons of ghee in it. That's my salad. You can see some avocado, tomato, olives, and other things, cheese, and it'll have 2 spoons of olive oil. That is actually curd or yogurt with some berries in it, full fat. You will notice there is no rice, there is no chapati. Initially, if you feel you can't go that extreme and aim to just reduce the amount of rotis or rice you're having, you can add more ghee to it, again, to increase the amount of fat. That, as you can see, is fish and eggs. I love that combination. It's cooked in butter, topped up with loads of cheese. The chicken I'd already shown you, meat I'd already shown you. And I think this is a vegetarian version of a sort of veggie burger, dal with ghee, as you can see floating there. That's brinjal or eggplant curry. And that's karela, bitter gourd curry, and salad again. So those are some of my sort of food examples. Please have a look at, sorry, I should have said that while I was still on that page. Please have a look at this Facebook page that we run, recently started, so it's not very old, but the idea is to sort of get together people who believe in intermittent fasting, want to know more about, exchange ideas, exchange recipes, and we tend to put our announcements for future talks and so on also on it. So come and join us there, contribute your ideas, what you have been doing, what food you might have prepared. We like pictures, and will be great to interact with you there also. We also have an Instagram page. As you can see, there are details about that. And we love to interact from that point of view also. Thank you very much.